Get your copy of Son of Mine, the second book in the Father of Mine series, available at Amazon for $4.99. That's Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk Live co-host, contributor to Football Night in America, Trade Deadline Day. What do you think of the Lions' strategy of what they did this morning?
I'm surprised they waited so long to replace Aiden Hutchinson. And then I got to a point where I was surprised they even bothered to find someone else. They've been fine without Aiden Hutchinson. This Zadarius Smith thing had been floating around for a while. There were a couple of other pass rushers available. Baron Browning got traded to the Cardinals yesterday by the Broncos, but we expected this. I just thought it would happen sooner. The sooner you get Smith in, the sooner he's up to speed, the sooner he can help make a difference. But again, the Lions look like a juggernaut now, even without Aiden Hutchinson. It's amazing. And I think Smith will fit what they're trying to do. He wants a little revenge on the Packers and Vikings teams he played for in the past. So the Lions get a little bit richer, and the Browns do a smart thing in trading current players for future assets.
But are the Browns total sellers?
They should be. And it's coincidental, if not ironic, and I never know whether to use ironic properly. But the Browns are the ones who proposed the delay in the trade deadline from the Tuesday after week 8 to the Tuesday after week 9. I think they should sell off any contract they can for any player that they don't think is going to be part of the resurrection after they shed the Deshaun Watson contract. They still owe him $92 million. His cap charge next year is $72 million. If they would cut him, it would be $172 million. They need to get young, cheap players in the form of draft picks to deal with the reality that so much cap space is going to be devoted to this disastrous Deshaun Watson contract. So trade Zadarius Smith like they did. Look into trading David Njoku. I've heard that their tight end could be available. Greg Newsome, I've heard that name bubble around. He's one of their corners. Trade anyone who's not going to be there on the other side of this Deshaun Watson fiasco.
Give me the trades that should happen. Not necessarily will, but should.
The Saints should trade Marshawn Lattimore to whoever will give them the best offer, and the Chiefs had been linked to him, although I'm told the Chiefs made some calls about cornerbacks a few weeks back and never really heard anything in return. And today's the day where phone calls could be made fast and furious as the deadline approaches. The Ravens are a team that would seemingly benefit from a Marshawn Lattimore, but the Saints, I think, are also in a similar mindset as the Browns. Really, any of these teams that know they're done. And after 9 weeks, we got a pretty good idea who the teams are that can just fold the tents and go home and trade players who aren't going to be there next year anyway for whatever you can get now. So Marshawn Lattimore should be traded, and the Steelers should go out and find a receiver somewhere because it's George Pickens, and then it's a steep drop down, all due respect, to Van Jefferson, Scotty Miller, Calvin Austin III. They need a number 2 to George Pickens, and they've been linked to some guys, but the Steelers aren't going to mortgage the future for anyone. They sit back and wait for a good deal. I won't be surprised if they steal one of these guys right before the deadline today.
Yeah, just trying to figure out what the last 2 weeks has done to the philosophy, the mindset, philosophy. The Rams 2 weeks ago, we're looking at maybe Cooper Kupp is gone. Now, all of a sudden, Puka Nacua comes back. Cooper Kupp is back to being Cooper Kupp. You got Matthew Stafford. Now you got a team that's clearly in the playoff picture. Can you think of anybody else who might have been a seller 2 weeks ago who might be a buyer now?
Well, let me just say this about the Rams, Dan, because I think this was something that was more real than people realized. Kupp was on the trade block, and the Rams were trying to kickstart a market for him. I'd heard that Matthew Stafford was ready to move on too. Now, he's never going to ask for it, but I think if a team had made an offer at the right time, they could have had him. And I was banging the drum that the Vikings should go get Matthew Stafford because Sam Darnold gets you here. Matthew Stafford gets you here if you're the Vikings and you're serious about trying to go win a Super Bowl. But that window's closed now because the Rams won 3 in a row. The Cardinals are a team that suddenly buying. I mentioned earlier they picked up a pass rusher. They should be looking. They're in first place in the division. It can change so quickly. And that's why the later the deadline, the better, because the more clear it is that you're a contender or you're not. And this year, with it after week 9, it really does create an environment where more teams can say, hey, we're in this, or let's just get what we can while we can for these guys who are going to be gone next year anyway.
Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk Live co-host, NBC Football Night America insider. The Cowboys are not going to have Dak Prescott for, it looks like, a month, going on the IR. The Micah Parsons situation, to me, is interesting. And you're so top-heavy with this roster. I'm guessing he's not available, but should he be available, Micah Parsons?
I wonder how many players in the NFL are truly untouchable. Patrick Mahomes is untouchable. Lamar Jackson is untouchable. Joe Burrow, Josh Allen. There's a group of players that no amount of draft pick compensation or veteran player compensation is ever going to get a deal done. I don't know. Is there a deal that Jerry Jones wouldn't refuse for Micah Parsons, knowing that he has to pay him?
I know.
The only good thing that came out of dragging their feet with CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott is Micah Parsons wasn't banging on the door saying, pay me. He's making $3 million this year, and I think he shouldn't come back until he's 100% from that high ankle sprain because he's carrying that injury risk. But Dan, I mean, if you really want him and you're willing to put some massive offer on the table, why not give it a shot and see if the Cowboys take it? Because it relieves them of the obligation to pay him 35, 36, 37 million a year.
The Raiders situation I find fascinating for a variety of things, Mike. I threw this out there. Let's say they get the number one pick. In your Mark Davis and Tom Brady, would you go after Belichick? Would you go after Dion and draft Shedeur Sanders? Or stay status quo?
Well, they need a franchise quarterback, and I think they miscalculated this past year the availability of one of the first-round talent at number 13. The last guy went at number 12, and they were stuck with Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell, and look at where it has them now. So you mentioned Brady, and you know he's going to be involved in whatever comes next. Dan, I've got this image, and we'll never know whether it happened or not, of Brady working for Fox on Sunday doing the Lions-Packers game, and during the breaks, working the phones on the whole Luke Getsy, is he going to be fired, who's going to take over? His worlds collided in 1 3-hour window, and there's no way he didn't know what was going on. He's going to be heavily involved in this team. And who he wants, Mike Vrabel, good buddy of Tom Brady. Won't surprise me if Vrabel ends up being the coach of the Raiders when it's all said and done.
So you don't see a window here of a package deal with Dion and his son, or Dion maybe being an Archie Manning to Shedeur's Eli Manning?
Dion has said he definitely doesn't want to coach in the NFL. Now, it wouldn't be the first time somebody said something and did the exact opposite, but he said it last year when he got really hot at Colorado. The opportunity to coach his son in the NFL might be something he doesn't say no to if it would come along. But at a minimum, and Dan, I've been waiting for this, and it's the NFL's equivalent of Haley's Comet. Every 21 years, somebody makes a power play in the draft. 1983, John Elway did it. 2004, Eli Manning did it. We're due for Haley's Comet to swing back around. 21 years is up. And the problem is, because fans and media are so quick to wag a finger at any player who dares to push back against the honor and the privilege of being drafted to go play for a dysfunctional team and have your career ruined before it even gets started by that team, no team in particular, the Jets. That needs to happen. Somebody needs to say, I'm not going to play for the Panthers. I'm not going to play for the Jets. I'll sit out for a year. I got NIL money. I don't need your money. I'll sit out for a year and re-enter the draft. But you need someone to run interference for you. Eli had Archie, and Shedeur has Dion.
You also look at these openings now. The Jets will be open. The Saints are open. Maybe the Bears is. I'm just curious, of all of these potential openings, Jacksonville, what's going to be the most attractive job out there?
Well, I mean, you could argue the Bears because of Caleb Williams. If you have somebody who's a big believer in Caleb Williams as a franchise quarterback, get an offensive coach. The problem with having a defensive coach and a young franchise quarterback is if things go well, the offensive coordinator gets hired to be a head coach elsewhere, and then you got to find another one, and it's lather, rinse, repeat. I want an offensive coach joined at the hip with Caleb Williams. So I think that's attractive if you're a young offensive mind who sees what you can develop with Caleb Williams over the next 15 years. It all depends on what you think about Caleb Williams. But like Ben Johnson, wouldn't that be something? Goes from the Lions to the Bears and joins up with Caleb Williams. You mentioned Belichick earlier. He's going to be hovering over all of this. who's going to be interested in basically giving the keys to Belichick. I think Jacksonville makes a ton of sense if they make a change there. But we're into the months, Dan, where even if teams haven't fired their coaches in season, behind the scenes, they're thinking about what they're going to do. They're deciding what they're going to do. They're talking to people through back channels. It never gets reported. It never gets mentioned. They don't just roll out of bed the day after the season ends and say, I think I'll fire my coach. This is when those decisions get made.
I just don't know if Belichick comes back. Now, maybe the all-time victory record is really important, or maybe to show that I don't need Tom Brady to win a championship, but it feels like Belichick, you got a young girlfriend, you got all of these jobs, you're having fun. I don't know. Seems like Nick Saban certainly is less stressful.
It all comes down to how badly you miss that dopamine rush of winning, of cracking the code on a defense or an offense. He's the best game day coach in NFL history. The personnel issues are what caused the ultimate problems in New England. And Jacksonville seems like the perfect place where he can go, take over, get the band back together. Josh McDaniels, Joe Judge, Matt Patricia, bring them all back. And I mean, when you consider what the Jaguars have been through, and they had Urban Meyer 3 years ago, they could do a lot worse than Bill Belichick. And he could go down there and bring a standard of performance that they've never seen before if they would get to a Super Bowl.
Great to talk to you as always, Mike. Thanks for joining us. Have fun today.
Thanks, Dan. See you, buddy.
Mike Florio, get your copy of Son of Mine, the second book in the Father of Mine series, available at Amazon for $4.99.